Portal 2 is a game that satisfies players after every puzzle. It forces you to think creatively, look beyond what you normally expect, and because of that, it's regarded as one of the best puzzle games made so far. Now, Portal 2 had big shoes to fill after the success of the original Portal, and while I think that the first is superior for many reasons, I can't deny that the puzzles of Portal 2 are much deeper than the ones of Portal 1, being complex in a way the original could only dream of. The way it does this is interesting, and it comes down to a consistent philosophy at the core of every puzzle's design. See, at the most basic form of every chamber in the game, there's always the same idea, and it comes down to three core mechanics: an object A, an object B, and a manipulator. The manipulator changes something about the object A to get it to the object B, and it's up to the player to find out how to use the manipulator. The first chamber is naturally the purest example of this, so I'm going to use it to demonstrate my point. The player has to use their hands, the manipulator, to manipulate the location of this cube, object A, so it can get to object B, the button. It's a simple example, yes, but I think you can find it at the heart of almost every chamber. As a more complex demonstration, let's take the 6th chamber of Chapter 8. This time, the object A is the cube, the object B is the player, and the manipulator is this light bridge, which manipulates the cube's momentum. Now, the format here hasn't changed, but this puzzle is clearly more complex than the aforementioned cube and button-based testing. And there's a simple reason for this, too: creativity. In the button puzzle, it's obvious that your hands are the manipulator, it's obvious how they will manipulate the cube, and it's obvious what your goal is. On the other hand, though, in Chapter 8, Chamber 6, it's not clear that the light bridge is the manipulator, nor how it could be used as one, nor what your goal is. And this enables player creativity. They have to connect the dots of what they know about light bridges to what they know about momentum, and thus a complex puzzle is born. That being said, it begs mentioning that there's a fine line between knowledge a player is able to deduce and knowledge completely foreign to them. Making a puzzle where the player has to rely on a part of a mechanic that they never knew about is an easy trap to fall into, but it's a dangerous one as well. The reason that the light bridge puzzle works is because it stems from the player connecting the dots of what they already know, not forcing the player to look for new dots and then connect those. But successfully executing a puzzle with these philosophies requires your mechanics to be designed in a specific way, or more specifically, your manipulators to be designed in a specific way. Object A's, as we'll discuss later, become more or less obsolete in more complex puzzles. That being said, they are useful in the early game, so if you want to know about how to make one, just apply some of the applicable advice I give about manipulators to your object A. The same goes for object B's, except these are even less of a challenge to make as they simply revolve around the corresponding object A. So that leaves us with manipulators, the core of every puzzle, the mechanic meant to be used in a clever way. But in order for it to be that, it needs to have multiple uses. To be used in a clever way, it can't only have one purpose. So this is where I propose an idea: properties, not purposes. What I mean by this is that every mechanic in Portal 2, instead of having just one purpose, has distinct characteristics, and these characteristics allow them to accomplish many tasks. Like how with Lightbridge, because of its solid nature, allows you both to walk on top of it and into it. That being said, this idea is a massive oversimplification, and all objects in the game do have a purpose, but it's a purpose with properties. Now, if you're not sure what I mean, let me show you excursion funnels. These guys have a purpose of changing location, but they do so in a roundabout way. A purpose with properties, if you will, having a funnel made of light hurl you across the room. At face value, this doesn't appear to be useful in any way, and well, it's technically not in most cases. The case where it is useful, though, is when you have a very specific type of purpose, or actually a very non-specific type of purpose, because you want a purpose that's incredibly broad. Now, broad, unironically, is a broad word, so let me clarify what I mean by using a list of criteria. A, it can manipulate all object A's. B, it's not drastically changing the objects, just one of their properties. C, in addition to B, the property it changes should be abstract in some way. And D, the property change should be sufficiently abstract that it can be executed in multiple distinct ways. Now, this is a complex list of criteria, and while it's not law, especially when it comes to early manipulators such as the reflection cube, it's very important to keep in mind. That being said though, what purposes could fit this list? Ironically, it seems a bit narrow. Well, there are a couple, like changing momentum, but above all is location change. I already mentioned that excursion funnels do that, but that's just because every manipulator in Portal 2 does it. Fling plates, repulsion gel, light bridges, you name it. And that's because it's the purpose purpose that's the most broad and thus leads to the best manipulators. But why? Why is choosing a broad purpose for your manipulators useful? Why is it worth the effort? Well, there are a couple of reasons, the first being originality. Because of how many ways you could execute a broad purpose, you're bound to find an original idea. It's nearly impossible not to. That being said, that's a very minor advantage, and for a more complex advantage, we're gonna have to put a little more detail into this. See, so far we've established that each manipulator has a purpose and a roundabout execution for it, but viewing this as a two-step process is incredibly dangerous, because it's frankly a bit more complicated than that. That being said, you still need to make your mechanic's purpose first. That hasn't changed, but what has changed is the going straight to the execution. Instead, your goal should be to create an abstract idea of the execution first, the most basic way it will perform your purpose without going into too much detail. To demonstrate what I mean by this, let's take repulsion gel, a mechanic whose purpose is location change. Its abstract execution of this purpose, though, is bringing you back to the height you fell down. Now, notice how this doesn't include the fact that it can be spread on objects or what have you. It only talks about the most basic way it executes the mechanic's purpose, and that is your mechanic's abstract execution. Once you've created it, you can move on to step 3, creating execution properties. This is what I mean by a purpose with properties. There are a couple of things that qualify as execution properties, all of which are important in their own right, so let me go over them. The first type is arguably the most useful, and it's not even really a property. In fact, it's more of a second purpose, allowing your manipulator to manipulate multiple different things. This is useful for obvious reasons, but the hard part of executing this is having none of the purposes interfere with any of the others. The solution to this, though, is making sure that the different things the object is manipulating have different broad purposes. You can't just have an object manipulate location change in 2 different ways. It just doesn't work. Instead, it's a better idea to have something be able to manipulate both location change and momentum, as an example, like excursion funnels or light bridges. But that's only one useful property of this format, and there are plenty more, but the real benefits come down to transportation. What I mean by this is that what this format really does is it allows every mechanic to be transported in a unique way, to move or be moved in a completely different fashion than anything else. To demonstrate my point, let's take repulsion gel. We've already gone over repulsion gel's purpose and execution, but the only reason it's unique is because it's transported in an interesting way. This is only achievable, though, because of the aforementioned mechanic format. It's designed for interesting transportation. But before I carry on, I need to mention that transportation is a strange thing, because while it sounds like it wouldn't be useful on paper, it actually enables puzzles that can test your creativity in more complex ways. How? Well, it lets you take creativity to the logical extreme and allows players to create things, making their own puzzle and then finding the solution to it, like here at the start of Enrichment Sphere 5. If you're not sure what I mean by this, then let's take gel as a basic example. Gel, especially conversion, is ultimately a very simple manipulator, but why it leads to complex puzzles is because the player has to create it. Now, by creating it, what I don't mean is that the player creates it out of thin air, which actually was originally going to be a feature in the game, funnily enough. No, what I mean is the transportation of an infinitely generated resource. And that infinitely generated part is key. If you noticed anything about the complex manipulators in Portal, it's that they're all infinitely generated. Hard light bridges, gels, funnels, you name it. And it's because this and unique transportation allows for creation. Take this chamber where you're creating excursion funnels. This is only possible because it's A, infinitely generated, and B, has a transportation method. Let's call this the rule of infinity, because that frankly sounds awesome. Pushing that aside, there's a problem you may run into, and it's trying to make an ordinarily non-infinite manipulator infinite. The trick here is to slightly redesign your mechanic, because this is an execution property, meaning that the purpose and execution can still stay intact if you add this modification. Regardless, in order to continue talking about the how of creation, I need to start talking about the why of creation. You'd probably think that it seems relatively obvious to test the player's creativity. I've already said that, but creation doesn't inherently test creativity. Rather, it allows for a whole new dimension of creative play if done correctly. See, what creation really is about is trying to figure out how to create something, like here, where you have to figure out how to get some repulsion gel on this platform. The puzzle isn't just about, oh cool, I can create things, it's a challenge that requires you to look at things in a new way. Now that we're on the same page, you're probably asking a question. How do you do this? Well, it all comes back to the beginning of the video when I was talking about Object A-B manipulator formats. The format is still present in creation puzzles, but it's a tad more complex. You have to do the same thing, but with 2 layers. Let me explain what I mean. Let's take one of my favorite puzzles from the game, this one in Chapter 8, Chamber 15. In this puzzle, it's clear that you want to get propulsion gel in this RAM, that's where you want to create it, but what's the solution? Well, interestingly enough, you need to use an Object A-B manipulator format to get it there. You want to get the gel, Object A, to the RAM, Object B, using an excursion funnel, the manipulator. We've already gone over this format, so maybe creation is easier than you thought. And this creation thing adds a whole new layer to this chamber, a puzzle inside of a puzzle, and frankly, this is what creation is for. Not just creating things, but being forced to create things in creative ways. And you can do this with an A-B manipulator format. Now, the final thing I'd like to touch on, and that's really important to keep in mind, is that the puzzle inside of a puzzle idea is adjustable. You can have as many puzzles inside your puzzle as you please, and with each meta layer it will become more complex. The original puzzles in the game only have 1 layer, but the final puzzle is practically an onion. So there are the resources to make both simple and complex puzzles alike, by building great mechanics and then taking advantage of them. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, I'll be making some more puzzle design videos in the future, so if you found this helpful, you should probably subscribe. We both win after all. Anyway, I hope to see you in the next video. It will not only also be about Portal again, but also be about puzzle design, so if you found this entertaining and helpful, you'll like the next video as well. Bye!